we're seeing those things happen. And, I know all of us, we're praying for a second student volunteer movement. That's something I'm praying. And maybe not everyone that's listening to this podcast would know what that is. Maybe they heard of it briefly, but I have two questions. Can you briefly summarize what the student volunteer movement is, and then answer what are some things we need to see happen, or even some strategies to see another one happen in our generation?
Yeah, well, as far as the student volunteer movement goes, if you were to kind of chart the history of missions, the peak, the mountaintop would be what we would call the student volunteer movement. And really it happens between like 1886 and 1920. Mm-hmm. And it started with a guy named Luther Wishart, who was traveling campus to campus with an organization called the YMCA. And he was just in charge of helping young men grow in their walk with God. And he hears a story of the Haystack prayer meeting that happened 80 years before that was really the beginnings of the missions movement in America. He hears this story that happened 80 years earlier in 1806 called the Haystack prayer meeting. And he gets fired up. He starts dreaming. He's like, man, I'm on all these campuses. I have access to all these young men. What if I held a 4-week summer project, get my good friend D.L. Moody to speak on the book of Matthew the entire 4 weeks from 9 to noon. Imagine hearing that. Mm-hmm. And so he has this vision of like, what if I held a 4-week conference? We could have it at D.L. Moody's boarding school called Mount Hermon. And so he spends from like February to June. Like, that's not long. He spends from February to June, and he recruits 251. He had to be a male. He recruits 251 men from 89 universities. But he wants it to kind of be a missions mobilization time. But he knew that from the platform wouldn't be as powerful as from the students themselves. And so he goes to his alma mater, Princeton, and recruits a guy named Robert Wilder, who started the Princeton Students for Foreign Missions. He was on his way to India. He had like 27 students going with him to India. And he gets Robert Wilder to come to this 4-week conference. And man, D.L. Moody takes to the stage and Robert Wilder takes the prayer. And they are praying for 100. Can 100 of the 251 sign on to be missionaries across the ocean? And so, after the first week, there's like 27. After the second week, there's over 50. After the third week, there's like 85. And on that last day of the conference, Robert Wilder gets up and he says, hey, the next message is fairly simple. It's called All Should Go and Go to All. And then he's like, if you want to be a cross-cultural missionary, we want you to do a few things. We want you to sign, what number are you and how many are we going to have? We want you to tell the country you're going to go to. We want you to tell the date you're graduating so we can hold you accountable to sell to that country. And then we want you to stand in front of the building, the cafeteria hall, and we're going to take a picture of you. And so I have the picture on my desk. It's just called the Mount Hermon 100, and it was exactly 100. Wow. And so that was the beginning of the student volunteer movement. But Luther Wishart, he's scratching his head. He's like, how many women weren't invited? How many other men weren't able to come because they had to take care of their father's farm or their father's health or other responsibilities? And so he's like, man, what if from the 100, we had 2 students go campus to campus and just tell the story? And of course, Robert Wilder, who was one of the key thinkers of the Mount Hermon 100, he was like, I'll go. And he got his really good friend named John Foreman to go with him. And I mean, imagine this, from 1886 to 1887, Robert Wilder and John Foreman travel to 162 campuses. Wow. And they recruit 2,106 students to be missionaries. I mean, just to blow your mind, as of 1885, America had only sent 1,900 missionaries in its history. Wow. Now, in one year, Robert Wilder and John Foreman recruit 2,106. They doubled the missionary force. I mean, that's the power. That's the power of university students. And so after that year, they came back to Wishart, and Wishart's like, oh my gosh, we got to have a few things. We've got to name the movement, and we need a leader of the movement. And so they decided, I mean, Robert Wilder was like, I already have a name. Foreman and I have been calling it the SVM. And Wishart's like, SVM, what does that mean? And he's like, well, students aren't asking the question, am I called or not? They're just saying, can I volunteer? So let's call it the student volunteer movement. I mean, think about this. The president of Princeton University. I mean, imagine the president of Princeton now saying this. The president of Princeton said this. After seeing the student volunteer movement, he said, has any such offering of young men and women ever happened in our age, in any age, except that of Pentecost? That was from the president of Princeton. I mean, so that's what we would call the student volunteer movement. And the result was over 20,000 sailed. They were goers, but over 80,000 stayed behind to be senders. Again, you need both, the goers and the senders.